Good afternoon, everyone. This is Adrienne Weil, VP of Strategic Partnerships of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for the latest in AHLA's COVID-19 webinar series. Today's webinar focuses on what the latest data reveals about COVID-19's impact on the U.S. hotel industry and what we can learn from past macroeconomic shocks. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that this webinar is for hoteliers. It is not intended for members of the media. If you are a reporter, please disconnect at this time. As I have mentioned on previous webinars, COVID-19, or the novel coronavirus, is a rapidly evolving situation. AHLA continues to work closely with government officials, public health leaders, and industry experts to keep you informed and to share tools and resources to help you navigate this ever-evolving issue. We encourage you to visit our website regularly at ahla.com/COVID-19 for the latest resources for hoteliers on how to prepare and respond, and to sign up for Hotels Act at ahla.com/HotelsAct so you and your employees can receive the latest updates. With that, we are pleased to be joined today by Jan Freitag from STR, which provides clients with premium global data benchmarking, analytics, and marketplace insights. STR is a platinum partner of AHLA and was acquired in October 2019 by CoStar Group, the leading provider of commercial real estate information, analytics, and online marketplaces. Jan is the Senior Vice President of STR. In his role, Jan oversees a variety of projects, all charged with the accumulation and interpretation of global lodging data. He is a sought-after public speaker and is frequently quoted in trade publications and the general news media such as the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Associated Press, Reuters, and Forbes. Before I turn it over to Jan, I wanted to note that if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Following his presentation, he will try to answer as many questions as he can. Jan, we thank you for your time today, and we are grateful for your participation and sharing valuable insights to the hotel industry. Thank you, and Jan, I'll pass it over to you.
Adrienne, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us today. For the week ending March the 7th, US RevPAR declined 11.6%. These declines were visible across all chain scales, across all hotel classes, and across all location types in different magnitudes. We fully expect, based on the international data that we have studied, that this was the first week in a string of very, very poor, likely double-digit RevPAR performance declines for the foreseeable future. You are here today because you are wondering, how bad will it get and how long will it last? The answer to the first question is we don't know. The answer to the second question is we don't know. We do know this. The industry is a cyclical industry. We live in cycles, and the industry always recovers. This here is our trusted 12-month moving average RevPAR percent change chart that most of you have seen at some point in your career. We've used this, for almost 30 years now. And what you see here is that there's always a rebound. In 2001, we thought we'd never fly a plane again. We were wrong. In 2008, we thought we didn't have a banking system anymore. We were wrong. When we look at past cycles, one thing is clear. The inalienable right of the American consumer for life, liberty, and the pursuit of travel will not be infringed. This too shall pass. We don't know when, but it will. You are here today because you're interested in the latest facts and figures of the hotel space. Let's not forget these facts and figures that matter probably more. Each number here is a life disrupted, a family torn apart, or a life lost. When you look at the total number on the left-hand side, this is as of 3/15, so this is already outdated. We probably have 170,000 cases right now. That number is largely underreported because of lack of testing. But what that number means is people staying home to care for loved ones, and people staying home either because of government mandates or because it's just prudent sense to act on social distancing. So I can't tell you about the future. I can tell you about the present, where we are today, and we can look back at past cycles to see what lessons we learned. The third question you have is, I can answer with yes. This recording will be made available, and the similar recordings, and I'll share with you the website at the end. I assume the HLA will have a landing page. STR.com is also a landing page. And if you have questions, please use the Q&A box. I did a similar webinar yesterday with 2,500 people. We had over 100 questions. We didn't get to all of them, so I apologize in advance if your question can't be answered. I cannot answer questions about pricing. I cannot tell you what to do. Let me be clear. As we move through these dark times, hotel operators will do well embracing the Stockdale paradox that some of you may be familiar with, may remember from Good to Great, the book by Jim Collins, which states you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. That you can never afford to lose faith, at the same time confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. That said, let me share some facts with you. What we know from our Asia office is this. China, for the country of China, occupancy declined almost 90% over 2 weeks to single digits for the country. 2,600 hotels were closed. I talked to Christine, who runs our Beijing office, yesterday morning, and she said, the good news is that 80% of those closed properties have opened again. Of course, the occupancy is not really recovering. That said, you see on the far right-hand side, that data is getting slowly, a little bit better. That we're going from single-digit occupancies to very, very low double-digit occupancies for the country. When we look at countries that decided that the only way to flatten the curve, to slow down the spread of COVID-19, is to put the country on lockdown, you see that the impact on occupancies is, of course, immediate and stark. What is worth noting, though, on the right-hand side, is that with these drastic government actions, the spread can be slowed and the data gets less bad. It's still very bad, but it gets less bad over time. Here's further data from our European office in London, showing for major European markets, occupancies and occupancy percent change. What you see is here is that the lockdown, of course, in Italy impacted occupancy percent change down 90% basically, and that the absolute level of occupancy is in the single digits. For most markets, London exclusion for now, but that's probably going to change, occupancies were sub 50%. They will further decline, is our expectation. Of course, a large part of this for major metros is precipitated by the cancellation and postponement of meetings. We tracked 230 global meetings postponed or canceled through March the 10th, so this data already is outdated. And you see that there's a large number of postponements, but of course, since we are in the first quarter, a lot of these meetings that were sales kickoff meetings won't happen in August. Those meetings are gone, that demand is gone. And we will see how easy we can go back on the road and make people comfortable to get back to meetings and congregate in groups larger than 10. The first main indicator that things were going to fall off a cliff was, of course, February 12th, when the Mobile World Congress was canceled in Barcelona, where there were no cases at the time. And the organizers found it prudent, rightly so, to call off the event. Some of you may be familiar with our forecast for 2020. This was presented by our CEO, Amanda Hite, at the Alice Hotel Investment Conference. we suggested that 2020 was the first year since 2009 where we saw a slowing. So the first year since 2010 where we saw slowing down. That forecast is, of course, at risk. Room demand, as most of you know, is very tightly linked to GDP growth. The forecast for GDP growth from our friends at Tourism Economics, who we believe very much when it comes to these forecasts, and they help us with our lodging forecast, was 1.7%. They have since revised their US GDP forecast to 1.3%. Their lockdown GDP forecast, if we go into a countrywide lockdown, is 0%, which of course puts the demand number absolutely at risk. Some of you may have seen JP Morgan over the weekend announce that they thought that GDP growth in the first and second quarter would be negative, which puts us technically into a recession. And so the demand to GDP connection is very well understood. The big wild card here is pricing. How will hoteliers react to single-digit occupancies? That's the question that we can't answer today, and we're of course monitoring the data very, very closely. The stock market has already spoken. Year to date, the Baird STR Hotel Stock Index of the 20 largest publicly traded REITs and C Corps, is down 62%. That was through Friday night. So here's where we are. I showed you the weekly numbers. This is the 28-day RevPAR percent change. So each data point here is basically the prior month, the prior 28 days, the prior 4 weeks. And what you see here is the data started out already slow, but sort of expectedly slow. On the week ending February 29th, the 28-day average was 0. Today we're standing at minus 3.2%. That data will get worse. We had, of course, expected that something would happen given the global data. It was just a question of time. So we looked at early warning indicators of deterioration, and our research team looked at the demand in hotels around airports. And we broke up the airports into the top 10 largest airports, excluding Las Vegas, and all other airport locations. And what you're seeing here is that through the week 22nd or through the 29th, there was already softening in the room demand around the airport locations. Until then, week ending March 7th, things fell off a cliff. Other location types were, of course, impacted very, very strongly as well. Urban properties, which rely predominantly, not predominantly, but more so on meetings. So RevPAR decline that was materially worse than the nation. Resorts, since this is of course not a time to go on vacation, so a double-digit RevPAR decline as well. Relatively better, so to speak, small town metro locations. So this is tertiary and locations outside outside major cities is relatively better. But that said, their absolute levels are so low that they don't have very far to go down. When we look at class performance, it's very clear the upper end of the market got hit disproportionately, again, performing worse than the national average. And this is because of the reliance on groups and meetings, which obviously stopped being held. We then took the class data and broke it out and looked at 3 separate markets and broke out the class data to see what are the variations. Unfortunately, there are not a lot. It's all uniformly rather grim. You see that in Seattle, where the first outbreak, in Washington State, where the first outbreaks occurred, in Seattle obviously being the largest market there, you see almost 50% RevPAR decline for luxury, 40% for upper upscale, and so forth. San Francisco, the data is uniform, RevPAR declined by class between minus 40 and minus 50%. New York City, the data looks here relatively better, where the RevPAR declines are only 25% or so. That will change. We fully expect this data to catch up to the San Francisco data going forward. As most of you know, we ask the upper end of the market, luxury and upper upscale properties, is the other rooms that you're selling sold in increments of 10 or more, what's called group, or increments between 1 and 9, what's called transient. This data here shows the sharp decline in group demand and therefore group occupancy. Transient is not much better. Transient RevPAR declined for the week ending March the 7th by 13%. Group declined by almost 18%. It is worth noting that the group ADR percent change here seems a little bit as an outlier because it's only quote unquote minus 1.2%. That is, of course, because the groups that were consumed last week were negotiated 2 to 4 quarters ago. So we fully expect, based on past cycles experience, that the group ADR percent change is actually not going to be as steep as a transient ADR percent change in the next 2 or 3 weeks. It will absolutely, after that, catch up, but there's sort of a positive hangover, so to speak, of group rooms being collected, group rooms being that were negotiated, then being consumed. That depends, of course, on the negotiations with the group meeting planner, depending on what the specific, force majeure contract clauses were. To put the segmentation data into perspective, this is not a visual for you to study line by line by line. I just want to give you a sense of how poor group RevPAR and transient RevPAR were along the top 25 markets. Seattle, Anaheim, San Francisco on the top, RevPAR declines over 50%. On the bottom, you see some markets that actually looked like they were growing. These are purely calendar shifts. This has nothing to do with the data. It's just that the data in the prior year was actually stronger or poorer. So growth here just means that they outperformed same week last year. It does not mean that they actually grew. And we fully expect that for the week 314, which is going to come out tomorrow, that the data, which comes out on Wednesday, which shows this data uniformly in double-digit RevPAR decline territory. To add insult to injury, we're now recording the strongest in-construction room count pipeline ever recorded. It matches the prior high of December 2007. We now have 211,000 rooms in the active pipeline. Anecdotally, what we're hearing is that the construction cycle, though, will elongate. That it's going to take longer for projects to get done and to open their doors, partially because there is a shortage of, my understanding, of doors and of TVs and of floor tiles, which all sit in containers in ports in China. And so as the bottleneck in the global supply chain eases, as China goes back to work, we will obviously see those things appear here. But right now there seems to be a bottleneck, and so that elongates the construction cycle, which obviously then means that our forecast for 1.9% supply growth, 1.9% supply growth for the year is likely going to come in a little bit lower. So that is where we are. Let's see what we can learn. We get the question a lot, as you can imagine. How does this connect? How does this compare to 9/11? How does this compare to 2009? So let's look at that. What is clear is that recoveries are not V-shaped. It's always an elongated U. And what we're looking at here is the ADR percent change, annualized, indexed to the prior peak. So the month of the event or prior to the event. And then we're comparing each month compared to that specific event and see how much of ADR declined on an annualized basis. And what you're seeing is that post 9/11, ADR declined 4% or so. And the full cycle, ADR declines and ADR growth back to the prior number was roughly 3 years or so. For the Lehman Brothers collapse and the great financial crisis of 2009, the annualized decline was roughly 10%. or so, the peak. And then it took quite a while longer for it to get back to where it was in the beginning of 2008. Because the truth is this, ladies and gentlemen, is you know this intuitively, and here's the data to back this up. It does take the industry twice as long to regain pricing power than it is to cut it. Post 9/11, it took us 12 months to go from peak to trough in terms of annualized ADR. It took us 24 months to go from trough to peak for a total cycle of 36 months. And you're saying, well, it's just one data point, Jan. Well, 2009 turns out is exactly the same pattern. It took us 19 months to go from trough to peak, 37 months to go it took us 19 months to go from peak to trough, 37 months to go from trough to peak. And keep in mind, please, that the $108 on the right-hand side is not adjusted for inflation. So in reality, the 2009 cycle took much longer to recover. Overall, what we're looking at here is 57 months from peak to peak. So call that 6 years. Call that 5 years. The cycles were markedly different when it comes to ADR performance. 9/11 had an external shock to the system. Pricing dropped dramatically and then got successively less bad. Back to 12 months later, where you see that ADR actually improved, relatively speaking. There was positive ADR growth. For 2009, what we find is that the ADR starts declining and then accelerates its decline. And we see a couple of months with 20% ADR decline, and then it gets consecutively less bad until 18 months into the cycle, we see ADR, relatively speaking, increasing. You put this all together, ADR percent change together with occupancy percent change, you get to RevPAR percent change, and you see that the data was stark in both of those downturns. The annualized trough of RevPAR decline was roughly 8%. Post 9/11, it was roughly minus 20% post in the midst of the great financial crisis. Where we are today is anybody's guess. It's going to be a rough ride going forward. We fully expect double-digit RevPAR declines in the weekly data going forward. The next question we get then, and this is specifically for the upper end of the market, that's where we have our segmentation data, is can you tell us a little bit about how the different segments react? And something interesting appears actually. Let me set the stage by saying the top 25 markets, and I'm sorry, this should just say 2009 top 25 RevPAR percent change similar. Ignore the total US. Luxury and upper upscale versus all classes. In the top 25 largest markets, we track the performance of the luxury and upper upscale classes and all classes. And what you see that they're remarkably similar. And the point here is to say, we know for the upper end how the segments perform, so that's probably also true for the lower end in those markets. Because this is what was true. Even though RevPAR declined for a long time, in the top 25 markets, transient demand rebounded after only 7 months. We saw positive growth in RevPAR. In demand for the top 25 markets from the transient side. Of course, that data was markedly overshadowed by the continued group demand decline, sometimes minus 20, 25%. Now, why did transient demand decline? Why did transient demand rebound? Maybe part of the answer is in this chart. Transient ADR declines were markedly accelerating 6 months into the down cycle. And then we saw ADR declines from minus 10% to going to minus 15 and then to minus 20. Is it possible that as hoteliers cut rates, the general news media, USA Today, CNN, what have you, started writing stories about, oh, look here, all these deals. And did that then entice travelers to go back on the road? We don't know the answer, but it's not unreasonable to assume. The problem, of course, is that the ADR that you cut, you don't get back, as we just talked about. It's not a V-shaped recovery. The other reality is that between cutting ADR and losing occupancy, if you cut ADR, your GOP gets hurt more. This is not a slide that I have here, but our friends from Consulting Analytics out of Broomfield wrote a fascinating article on Telnews Now, where they show, the data shows exactly this point, that if you sacrifice ADR in order to bolster occupancy, your GOP decline is worse than when you hold on to rate. But again, I'm not giving pricing advice, I'm just telling you what happened in prior cycles. This could all be different now. What happens is when you see steep declines in transient rates is, for the nation, a chart that should not exist. This chart makes no sense. What it shows is that the group ADR for a couple of months in the United States was higher than the transient ADR. In other words, the group rate that was negotiated in bulk 2 to 4 quarters ago at a discount, right? Because the meeting manager said, hey, I'm bringing you all these people, I want a discount. Suddenly, what we see is travelers who booked 2 to 4 quarters ago in the room block 2 days prior to their travels look online on a third-party site and see the same room in the same hotel for a cheaper rate. And so what they do is they do this dreaded cancel rebook, where they cancel inside the room block, rebook on a third party, come to the meeting, the hotel sales director tells the meeting planner, hey, you didn't fill your quota. You had too much attrition. Not everybody showed up. And the meeting planner says, no, everybody did show up. They just weren't inside the block. And our data then reflects that, likely with a very slight increase in transient demand that should really be allocated to group demand. This chart should not happen. And this is, of course, your mileage may vary. I know you wouldn't do this in your property, but this is for the nation. This clearly is what happened. So that was the present, and that was the past. And you're wondering, is there anything good you can tell us here? Anything? And the truth is, not really. But I have 2 kind of good news data points. The first one is this. This is literally just math. I have no idea if this is going to come to pass, but this is just math, so bear with me. We can look at the room demand decline between the peak of 2007 and the trough of 2009. And we can say, okay, room demand declined 8.6% annually. If we apply the same room demand decline to the 2019 room demand sales figure, you actually get room demand that would still leave the industry at 59.3% occupancy. We call that just under 60% occupancy. The reason for that is, of course, that we have been at demand peaks for the last 6 years, 5 years. Ever since 2005, we've sold more rooms than ever every year. 2015, I apologize. Ever since 2015, we've broken demand records. We've sold more rooms than ever. So we're at a very, very high level of demand. So it's possible that the room demand shock to the occupancy will be buffered a little bit. The other interesting data set is this. You haven't seen this. We haven't published this yet. This was just organized last Friday, basically. We have a market insights team in Hendersonville, and we have a TCI team in Edinburgh, and they do consumer research. And they currently have a survey in the field that talks about travelers, asks travelers about their travel intentions from 8 different countries. And the survey organizers were able to give us sort of a quote unquote a pop quiz. We're allowed to ask one question and they can turn around in 48 hours. And what we asked them is, hey, can you talk to Chinese travelers, specifically Chinese travelers that took a leisure trip in the last 12 months, and ask them, do you plan to take more, fewer, or same amount of trips in the next 12 months? And the answer here is 50% plan to take more international trips. Showing A, the resilience of travelers, B, that after being sequestered at home, there is a need for travel, and C, how resilient our industry truly is. As I said at the beginning, yes, the recording of this will be made available. The recordings for the webinars that we at FTR give are always available on ftr.com. We have a landing page there. If you scroll down in the middle, the COVID-19 landing page, you can find articles, blogs, all our webinars from all around the world for free. And of course, check out our friends from Hotel News Now. They've been writing, interviewing you, interviewing owners, interviewing bankers, interviewing people on the operation side to see, okay, what do we see on the ground today? If you had a Star Report, if you're a member of the Star Report family, we're here to help. We know these are rough times that we're moving into. Use us as a resource. The email is always info@str.com. I know I speak here for the AHLA as well, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, that they're your trusted partner. They are here to help as well. And please let us know how we can be of assistance. Feel free to share this webinar and this recording and everything that's on str.com with your team, of course, as well. So with that said, I'm going to look in the Q&A box and then look at the, there seems to be chat going on. So I'm going to look at the chat box and have a look at that as well. So the question from Philip is, have we looked at SARS, Ebola, and how long the cycle how long it takes for the cycle to recover? On the macroeconomic level, I'm not the right guy, but you can certainly find that information. You know, I know the Federal Reserve has published something. Tourism Economics and Oxford Economics have published on that. We know that for SARS and H1N1, and we wrote a white paper that's on str.com, the impact in the country, SARS in Thailand, N1, H1 for Mexico, was severe. But for the US, we actually weren't that affected. Like SARS, I think RevPAR declined 5 months or so, N1, H1 also not that much. So it is completely local. Now this is a global pandemic, and that's different. Even though SARS was a global pandemic, I think this was easier controlled because people were symptomatic when they were contagious. We know that people who are asymptomatic are contagious. So you can spread it without knowing it, even though you feel healthy, that you actually are a spreader, which is why it's so important that people stay home and socially and social distance and, you know, flatten the curve. There will be a lot of people in hospitals, and we need to make sure that we don't add to that. So working from home, staying at home, only going out for the bare necessities is really, really key in this environment. I'm not telling you this because I know anything about epidemiology. You know, this is what the CDC and the WHO have been saying. What's being done by servicers? Sri asked, what's been done by servicers on CMBS loans and waivers and forbearance? I can't talk about that. I would think that they're talking about this as we speak, at their conference calls, flying back and forth as we speak. As you may remember, post-2009, the debt service or the lack of debt service for a lot of hotel properties was so bad that smaller and regional community banks basically said, look, we don't want to own your hotel. We're not hotel people. We're bankers, you know, and this whole idea of extend and pretend, of pretending everything will be better eventually, sort of took hold, which is why there weren't a whole lot of distressed asset sales, which is what everybody had thought of. There was a lot of dry powder on the sidelines trying to jump in as properties defaulted, and that this sort of flood of default properties never came to pass, as banks just said, look, we had a good relationship, you've always paid on time, we know these are tough times, let's just, you know, hold our nose and figure this out going forward. Do you think this impact is going to take longer than the norm, Nimesh asks. Nimesh, I don't know what the norm is. You saw in these 2 cycles that they were very, very, very different, you know, because the impacts were very, very different. So we haven't seen something like this yet. You know, if I had to guess, it could be a combination, like a sharp shock to the system that we're seeing in our data, and then because of social distancing and people not traveling, an elongated down cycle, which eventually will get better. But I don't know how to answer that question. Let me see what else I can answer here. Let me see what's going on the chat function here. Is there any more questions? Will they be recording of this posted online? I can't speak for the HLA, but a very similar, Nathan asks, will there be a reporting of this posted online? A very similar webinar is posted on the str.com website.
And Jan, this is Adrienne, just to chime in. The recording of the webinar will be sent to all of the attendees, and we will also have it behind the member wall on our site in the webinar archive.
Great, thank you. Michael asked, how long do you think it will take China RevPAR to return to where it was prior to the virus? I'm wondering if we can read into that for how the US might shake out. I can't answer the second part of the question. I do think that there is indeed a relationship between what we see in other markets. The US is coming late to this. As I said, in China, we saw occupancies decline to single digits, and then now slowly seeing, you know, shoots of green, so to speak. We are just at the beginning of this, you know, and China is arguably, you know, 7 to 8 weeks ahead of us, you know, when it comes to hotel performance. But they're also much stricter in their social quarantine and in their social distancing rules. So the problem with the lack of federal mandate is that this could then elongate the cycle. You know, and I know that a lot of governors have stepped up, and I know that the federal government will eventually step up, or has, you know, arguably stepped up, but the Chinese government was just a lot stricter a lot sooner. So I can't tell you when China will recover, but we're obviously watching that very closely because we think there will be a relationship to where the US is today and how we come back out of this. Catherine asked, do suburban markets and tertiary markets ever catch up to major markets in terms of decline percentages? How long does that take? I assume you mean, is it going to be bad everywhere? And I think the answer in this instance is yes. I think single-digit RevPAR declines that made secondary, tertiary markets look a little bit better last week will not be visible when we push the data out on Wednesday night, Thursday morning. Alberto asks, do you expect that the stimulus package being enacted will have a positive effect on this? It's way too early to tell, Alberto. Fingers crossed. I'm not familiar with the details. So, I mean, I trust that smart people with input from, you know, AHOA and from the American Hotel and Lodging Association and from HSMAI, you know, and from US Travel have hopefully, you know, thought about our industry, you know, since we are a huge job provider. and have said, yes, this should help us, but I can't talk about the details. And I assume that the AHLA will have more webinars about this specifically, you know, as it gets enacted.
Jan, I'll jump in. On Thursday, we'll be having a webinar that is focused on our advocacy work in this space. So certainly issues like this will come up on that one, and we welcome everyone to join us on that one on Thursday. Info is on our site to register, as well as through our member communications that are going out. It'll be this Thursday afternoon.
Thank you. Adi asks, is it safe to assume that from past trends indicate that large convention hotels take longer to catch up based on their higher mix of group business? So that is a tricky question, because we know that a lot of group meeting planners still want to hold their meetings, and they just probably negotiate with the hotel to say, look, can we just push this out, you know, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months? You know, there are, of course, some groups that are meeting regionally, and they swap regions, right? They meet East Coast, West Coast, North, South. So they rotate around the United States. If they're not meeting this year, that demand is gone, you know, but they're already on the books for 2021, for 2022 in a different part of the country. And that demand certainly still stays. And I don't think that demand will get impacted in 2022, for example. So they will have an immediate, steeper impact. And then it's going to be interesting to see how much people want to travel going out, you know, after, you know, whatever, 2-3 months, 120 days or so, you know, and how much people feel safe being with groups again. We can't answer that today. What do you see regarding extended stay properties? I haven't looked at that specifically, but I will. That's an interesting question, and I would probably, if there's something there that is counter to the trend, which I doubt sincerely, but if there's something that's counter to the trend, we will put a quick short white paper on str.com. What's your best guess on location performance? Jeffrey asked, what's your best guess on location performance in the US during the rebound? So obviously, when people start to travel again, post 9/11, it was that they weren't quite comfortable flying, so drive-to markets did just a little bit better at the beginning. We also saw that higher end properties did a little bit better. The reasoning here is that people who thought that they would spend a budget, even a high budget, to go to Asia, to go to Europe, they want to stay closer to home, but they still have this budget. So the upper end properties actually saw demand rebound as well. Now, part of that could have also been that the ADR cuts on the high end were oftentimes severe, and that may have attracted an audience that normally couldn't afford those properties. Excuse me. Sorry. Do you expect a V-shaped ADR recovery once travel restarts? Absolutely not. John asked that. I think our data is clear. We now have 2 cycles that we lived through, that it takes twice as long for national ADR to recover than it takes to cut national ADR or annualized ADR for the US. Now, again, your mileage may vary, right? Your individual property, I don't know what's true for you. You can go back to your data, you know, to the STAR report, and look and see what happened with ADR on a property level in 2001 and 2009. But for the nation, absolutely not. With that said, I think I'm just scrolling through the other questions. I can't answer the questions that I haven't answered already. So, you know, I guess the last question here is like, is the government going to help out the hotel industry at all financially? And I can't comment. I trust again that the AHLA is working diligently with U.S. travel to make sure, you know, that the impact will be lessened as much as possible. So with that said, I appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you, Jan. Thank you again for your time and insights and candor. Everyone on the line, we will archive this webinar on our website and send out the recording. Again, we encourage you to visit our website regularly at ahla.com/COVID-19 for the latest resources for hoteliers on how to prepare and respond. And please sign up for Hotels Act, ahla.com/HotelsAct, so you and your employees can receive the latest updates. When it comes to efforts on the Hill, this is one of the most critical ways for us to share stories of how this is impacting your business. So please sign up for Hotels Act and you can respond to all of our queries. Thank you so much and hope that you have a good rest of the day. Take care.